My brother's laughter still echoes in my head from that day inside the lawyer's office. "You got the old wreck," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I got the empire. Dad's $4 million business is mine. You? You got a house that's falling apart." The other relatives shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Josh didn't care. He never did. But what my brother didn't realize, what no one in that room knew, was what Dad had actually hidden inside those old walls. By the time Josh figured out, it would be far too late. Dad had always played the long game. And this time, I was the one holding the winning hand. Dad passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Sudden heart attack. He was 68. Until that day, I'd somehow believed he'd live forever. The funeral took place at Riverside Methodist Church in Asheville, North Carolina, the same place where he'd married Mom 35 years earlier. She'd been gone 6 years now, and I think a part of him left with her that day. I arrived early. The church smelled of lilies and aged wood. I sat in the front pew, alone, staring at the closed casket draped in an American flag. Dad had been a veteran, served in Vietnam, came home, and built a printing business from scratch. By the time I was born, it was thriving. When Josh came along 3 years later, it had become $1 million operation. Josh showed up late. Of course. He strode in wearing what looked like a $3,000 Tom Ford suit. He didn't shed a tear, just shook hands like he was at a networking event. I watched him move through the crowd, charming people, pretending to be the grieving son while glancing at his phone between condolences. That was Josh, always performing. We were never close. Growing up, I was a quiet one, the kid who liked books and working with my hands. Josh was the golden boy, football captain, homecoming king, Dad's pride and joy. Every Sunday dinner, Dad would ask Josh about his sales numbers, his clients, his next big deal. Then he'd turn to me and ask, "So, how's the house coming along?" As if my life were some hobby project on the side. 3 days later, the will was read at Morrison & Associates, the law firm Dad had used for decades. The mahogany conference table felt too big for just the four of us. Me, Josh, Mr. Harrison the attorney, and Rita, Dad's longtime accountant. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading. The legal language was cold, impersonal. Then came the part that mattered, the distribution of assets. "To my son Joshua," Mr. Harrison read, "I leave my business, Campbell Printing Solutions, including all assets, client contracts, and operations valued at approximately $4 million. Josh leaned back in his chair, grinning. Of course he did. He'd seen it coming. He probably thought he'd earned it. Then came my turn. "To my son Daniel," Mr. Harrison continued, "I leave the family home at 17 Oak Street, Asheville, North Carolina." Silence. Josh burst out laughing. "The old house? That's it? That place is worth what? 200 grand, if he's lucky." He looked at me with a mix of pity and mockery. "Guess we know who the real son was, huh?" I didn't answer. I just sat there, swallowing that familiar sting of being second best. Mr. Harrison looked uneasy but said nothing. Rita avoided my gaze. I signed the papers quietly, shook hands with the lawyer, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear Josh already on the phone, bragging about his empire, his inheritance, his future. That night, I drove to the old house. I hadn't planned to, but I needed to be somewhere that still felt like Dad. The place sat at the end of a tree-lined street, the oaks the same ones Dad had planted when I was 5. It was a modest 2-story Craftsman with a wraparound porch built in 1952. The paint peeled, the shutters sagged. I could see why Josh called it a dump. But standing there in the driveway, I remembered summer evenings on that porch, Dad teaching me how to use a level, how to read a tape measure, how to fix instead of replace. I let myself in. The air was stale, thick with the faint scent of his coffee. Everything looked just as he'd left it. His reading glasses on the side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle, the newspaper folded beside it. I wandered through the room slowly, touching the familiar, feeling the weight of a childhood that seemed both distant and close. Upstairs, his bedroom door stood slightly ajar. The bed was made, corners tucked military tight, the way he'd always done it. I hesitated, then stepped inside. I started sorting his things, not sure what I was looking for. Clothes to donate, papers to file, maybe a clue as to why he'd left me so little. That's when I heard it. While moving the dresser to vacuum behind it, there was a hollow thump, not solid like the rest of the wall. I tapped again. Hollow, 2 feet over, solid. My pulse quickened. I examined the baseboard and noticed a small section where the paint looked newer. Grabbing a screwdriver from Dad's nightstand, I pried it loose. Behind it was a metal panel with a keypad, the kind you'd find on a safe. I stared at it, thinking hard. Then I tried the only number that made sense, Mom's birthday, 072356. A click. The panel opened. Inside the wall was a small fireproof safe. Inside that, 3 things. A sealed envelope with my name on it in Dad handwriting, a folder full of documents, and a small brass key tag, First National Bank, Box 217. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The letter was dated 2 months before he died, written on Dad's personal stationery. Daniel, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you found what I wanted you to find. I'm sorry for confusion during the will reading. And I'm sorry if Josh made you feel small. But you need to understand, this was never about money. It was about knowing my sons. He went on to explain how he'd been watching us both our entire lives. He'd seen Josh's ambition, his charm, his natural gift for business, and also his arrogance, his refusal to listen, his belief that confidence was the same as wisdom. I'm giving Josh the business, Dad wrote, because he expects it. I need to see whether he can manage it without me, or if he's been coasting on my reputation all along. Then he wrote about me. You were always different, Daniel. You never needed the spotlight. You learned by observing. You asked questions. You fixed things instead of throwing them away. You reminded me of myself before the world hardened me. Dad explained that the house wasn't my real inheritance. The true gift was in the safe deposit box at First National Bank. I've been saving for you since you were 10, he wrote. Stocks, bonds, a trust fund. Everything I didn't want Josh to know about. Because if he did, he'd demand half. This is yours. You've earned it by being the son who never asked for anything. Make me proud. Love, Dad. I sat there on the floor of his bedroom and cried. For the first time since the funeral.